What is NHI? Who will be eligible for it? How will it affect you and me in terms of our daily lives? What does that mean for the private sector? Will it destroy the private sector? These are the frequently asked questions about national health insurance, which, of course, the president has signed into law. It is the morning after the night before. We've invited Dr. Nicholas Crisp, who is the Deputy Director General of the National Health Insurance for the Department of Health, to answer those questions and more. Dr. Nicholas Crisp is the Deputy Director General of National Health Insurance at the Department of Health. Dr. Crisp, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's start with the questions many people are asking themselves today, because we're trying to make sense of what the way forward it might mean. If I'm on medical aid, does that mean I should stop paying my premiums?
Morning, Bongani. Morning to the listeners. No, absolutely not. The president only signed the act yesterday, so there's no fund yet. There's no board to manage the fund. There's no administration. There's not even regulations or anything in place yet, so that would be a really silly thing to do. The current health system is very much still in place and the current laws still apply. Remember that this act has not even been promulgated yet, and those clauses that are going to be promulgated first will only follow in the months ahead. So please don't change anything now.
All right. The next step, of course, as you say, is for the president, I'd imagine, to proclaim sections of the legislation. This has been a process that has been in the making for as long as 20 years. I think it's important to set that context.
Yes, indeed. So there's been a lot of work done over the past 20 years and more for working through the ideas of the various structures, payment mechanisms, funding mechanisms, service delivery platforms, how accreditation will work, etc. And that's all what's culminated now in the Act. Now we need to start putting the administration together, and we started in the National Department last year. So I've been in the department now 3 years, and besides the time lost in COVID, we've been putting together a skeleton staff to start designing the actual details. So what will happen now is we will ask the president, or the minister will ask the president to proclaim just those clauses which will enable us to put the governance structures in place, so that's sections 12 to 30, and that process will result in regulations being published for the public to comment. That will be for a 3-month period. And then when the public has finished commenting, we will make the necessary adjustments and then go about the business of recruiting a board, which will ultimately, the minister will sign their contracts of appointment as a board. And while that is happening, we are busy. We will need to create an administration and move some of us out of the National Department of Health to begin to set up that administration. So it's a 3-year period that is provided for in the Act for all of this to be set up.
Medical aid, of course, is a privately paid for system. People choose, if you will, to set aside those funds as a contribution. There are estimates that peg the cost of NHI anywhere near around 200 billion rand. The question many people have been asking is, where will it come from? VAT, personal income tax, a wealth tax? How will we pay for it?
Yeah, so what is now an Act provides for various sources of funding, but ultimately everything that comes to government comes through taxes. It's the only way to raise money in the public domain. At the moment, there's about 270 billion rand that is already in the public health system, so that's our general taxes that comes from the fiscus, and it goes via the various provincial equitable shares into the provincial departments of health and some other funding streams in the public sector. The first part of that section that deals with funding talks about the shifting of those funds. So the lion's share, perhaps 200 billion, maybe more, depending on over the years ahead how the functions are shifted, will move from their current funding streams into the control and payment through the fund. Then there are the funds that are spent in the private sector, and that's what you're referring to. Now, at the moment, there are tax credits given to those who are on medical schemes or who have medical aids. Once the medical aids are no longer covering benefits, then there's no point in subsidizing with tax rebates. So that amount of money needs to be raised. It's about another 37 to 40 billion rand. There are also subsidies given by employers, particularly in the public sector. So, for instance, if you take just the public service members, the state subsidizes or pays to medical schemes somewhere around 70 billion rand as the employer contribution to medical aids. Once those medical aids are no longer covering those benefits, then obviously that money will move to the fund and no longer to medical schemes. So that's already well over 100 billion rand that's currently in the system to redirect. Then there are provisions for other mechanisms of raising money, which is what you're referring to. So I think it's going to be systematic over several years where different funding streams are tackled depending on their current legislative framework.
No doubt you would have noticed the howls of opposition to this. People who say it's unworkable, it's unconstitutional even. There are even suggestions that it may dent investor confidence. What's your response to all of that?
Well, the question of constitutionality has been raised right from the outset, and every time something was raised in Parliament, we members of the Department of Health went and got legal opinions. So we have had opinions along the way on each issue where somebody has raised their views about constitutionality. Our work that we've done suggests that there's nothing unconstitutional about it. But we all know until these things get tested in courts, it's my word against your word, and the court will have the final say. So I suspect we will be taken to court. There will be, it will be adjudicated in either the general courts or in the constitutional court, and then we'll have finality. That's fine. I think that's the nature of democracy, and we are quite happy to go with it.
AfriForum says it's going to launch a class action suit. That's the kind of move that could delay all of this considerably.
Well, that's not my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand particularly, until we see what in the papers, what they have in mind. But the way in which we understand it is that people can challenge clauses, they can challenge whatever gets promulgated or the president intends to promulgate. And in the meantime, we will continue with setting up the machinery of the fund. Unless the court tells us that we're not allowed to do it, we will go ahead and do what we have to do. That's our job as the administration.
Got an SMS here from Justin, one of our listeners, who wants to know, as far as the Act is concerned, will NHI cover people who are undocumented, who are in the country even as asylum seekers?
So what the Act says is that the fund must pay for all people in the country for emergencies, but only those who are legally in the country will be covered for everything. So when I talk about everything, I talk about the benefits at any point in time that the fund is paying for will be paid for anybody who's legally in the country. You must remember that most undocumented people in South Africa are in fact South African citizens, and during COVID we worked very hard to understand who these people are and where they are. For a vast number of reasons, there are many South Africans who are undocumented. So one must not jump to conclusions that just because somebody's undocumented that they are not a legitimate beneficiary of what happens in the country.
Dr. Nicholas Crisp is the Deputy Director General of the National Health Insurance at the Department of Health.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.